What's up, guys? It's your girl Samar. Welcome back to the front line, guys. I have missed y'all. You know, February rolls around, and I got to do things to keep active when February rolls around. If you guys have been with me for a while, y'all should know uh, it's a rough month for me. It's the month that, I also turned 48 in, but it's also the month that I lost my son and my dad. On the exact day. Same day, guys. February 19th. Their birthdays were 12 days apart. They passed away 12 years apart. So while it's the same day, it wasn't on the literal same day. It's 12 years later. I lost my dad, and then 12 years later, I lost my son. But both on February 19th. So February is a little rough for me. Used to be one of my favorite months, given it's also my birthday month, right? Which, by the way, guys, your favorite YouTuber is turning 48 next Sunday. All right now, February 15th, guys. But listen, guys, I feel like today I'm going to be sounding like one of my other favorite YouTubers. And shout out to Sister Yolanda on this one, because we both agree we like this dude. Shout out to Willie D. Okay? Willie D like to call people some uncivilized mutts. And you know what, Willie D, we going to talk about some uncivilized mutts today. We certainly are. But before we could get into that, guys, Samar tries not to get too pop culture. But I'm gonna tell you something. I was rooting for Puerto Rico yesterday. Mm-hmm. That's an island that I have been to for my honeymoon. Gavin's dad. We went to Puerto Rico. We stayed in Condado. Let me tell you something. It was a beautiful place. They've got a bioluminescent bay. Those are the origins of life. Y'all know that. So, shout out to Puerto Rico for not being an island of trash. Boy, I'll tell you, it's far from it. You're going to go to sleep to frogs singing you to sleep every night. If it's an island of trash, it's probably one now because y'all got there. Okay, I think that man did a good job of showing you what it looked like before they got there. He even brought in the electrical poles. The more I watch it is the more I catch stuff. He said he had a wedding. I wonder if he had a proposal too, huh? But I won't linger too long here. I just thought it was a good show. My Spanish can be spotty, but I enjoyed it. I know what having a party looks like. You know what I'm saying? And I know what it looked like when you ain't invited to the party. Damn. You be on the sidelines, salty, looking sad. You might try to have your own party, as a matter of fact, because you wasn't invited to the party. So, yeah, them people was partying yesterday. That's all I got to say. And they look good doing it. I can root for the good guys. You know what I'm saying? I like to see people winning, and I think it was their turn to get their shot. Anyway, let's get back to the lesson at hand, guys. The lesson at hand. We got to talk about these uncivilized mutts. We back at it, guys. We back talking about the thugs. Yeah, we are. Because these thugs, these thugs right here are how we got the problem we got right now. They definitely are. They came here and on assignment, and you didn't know what their assignment was, because this is pretty much hidden in history. I'm gonna take y'all to a website that's gonna start off telling y'all that. Alright, they're gonna tell you that this specific campaign has been pretty much hidden. Right? Because they don't want this guy's name to be tarnished. They want him to be the cherry tree. What was it? The honest president. He chopped down the cherry tree, right? But no, this guy was the village burner, the town destroyer. Okay? The same one slapped on the back of the dollar bill was here wiping out whole civilizations. Okay? Ethnic cleansing. All right? They talk about that word a lot over there, but do you know it happened here? And I want y'all to pay specific attention to the quote under this picture, under this Sullivan Clinton campaign. You ought to hear and listen to what we women shall speak, for we are the owners of this land, and it is ours. So you want to know why the branch is waking up? Because you ought to hear and listen. What Shira say? Listen to your kinswoman. You ought to hear and listen. Come to the front, men. Y'all sold this land. You had no right to. You got in bed with these people. And now we're in the predicament we're in because you started making deals with these no good knights. That's how we got here. And this Seneca woman is telling you it's ours. Sullivan Clinton is an essential journey. It's not for the faint of heart, nor the stubborn of mind. It's a major event in U.S. history that's been off the radar screen for far too long. More road signs than any New York event, yet not in our school books. I wonder why. Y'all ain't never heard of this campaign. It ain't in the school books. They're making sure because they need this man's image, the town destroyer. They want his image to be maintained. But just as America undergoes historic change, the lessons of Sullivan Clinton are more relevant than ever. Come learn at your own pace. Do your research here. Then come back again for more as we continually update this living website. So shout out to these people that have been maintaining this website to make sure that this piece of history isn't lost. That these uncivilized mutts' deeds are brought to light. Okay? And they made sure to highlight this woman's, she's just Seneca woman. Like she's just an extra in the show, right? While everybody else above her got a name. But she said the most important quote. You ought to hear and listen to what we women should speak, for we are the owners of this land, and it's ours. So shout out to the men highlighting that this is our land. Yeah. But what you're failing to highlight is that you were behind it being sold, and you took it from the woman. This is what y'all not saying. Okay? Everyone gonna be on here this week doing their little bit, reminding you that this is your land. But what they not gonna remind you is that it was the men selling what didn't belong to them. They're not gonna say that part out loud. You know? They're not going to tell you that the land, yeah, while it belongs to us, it's specifically her inheritance. That's why when you look up that word land, you're going to see it linked to the feminine. So listen to this. Hold on a second. I pulled out the wrong article. I found that article out because I want to prove everything that I'm saying to you guys. These men were being paid in land, okay? They were being paid in land, and we already seen where that tactic came from, because this is a newly formed kingdom. They don't have no money to pay these people in yet. They hadn't slapped people on the back of these greenbacks yet. They're building up to that. So for the time being, they have to pay these people somehow. They are paying them with our land. Watch. revisiting George Washington's assault on the Haudenosaunee 240 years later. Okay? In 1779, General George Washington suspended the colonial war against England and moved to extinguish the Haudenosaunee with his Sullivan Clinton scorched earth campaigns. Okay? These men were committing atrocities against the land. They were using scorched earth tactics, and we're going to get into that. Washington's soldiers were paid with land. What'd I tell you? What'd I tell you? They didn't have no money. Greenback is a new thing, okay? They were paying these people with the land. As a result, the Haudenosaunee created the title of President Onondaga's Town Destroyer. It was the largest assault upon native nations in U.S. history, yet rarely is it mentioned. Anybody on here today going to tell you about the Sullivan Clinton Scorched Earth campaign? No, they're not going to tell you. Probably because they would have to admit that the men were going behind the women's back and selling the land. Okay, and taking up their daughters. Watch. The effects, however, continue to reverberate throughout the world and can be traced through land theft. See? Broken treaties and attack on the sovereignty, right? Who is the sovereignty? She is. That continue to inflict harm to today. Okay? This is what they were doing. They said this campaign not only provides a more accurate account in highlighting how xenophobia, racism, and sexism are part of the framing of the United States. Who's a part of the framing? The Founding Fathers. It's built into it. Okay? Listen, guys. These thugs had a mission, and they fulfilled that mission. Now, I want to take y'all back to this folder, hold on, and show y'all these longhouses, because we got some actual photos. Now, strange that we would go to the Sullivan Clinton campaign, and the first photo that would pop up is Mother Earth. But you don't believe that this is about this promised land, huh? About these rolling hills, these everlasting hills, and the dew from heaven that you were the steward of. You don't believe it's about that, right? They know what time it is. Look, here goes some of the longhouses. Ganadagon? I don't know, guys. Don't make me say this stuff out loud. But listen, you see it. And down here they references the longhouses. Who told you about the longhouses? We heard about them right here. Those were the long houses. I want to see the album. Here we go. Here we go. Here go some of the photos from now they know they need to stop, but anyway. They would put the canoes up high. It was a simple structure, but it was all natural materials. You don't see no drywall now, do you? You don't see no concrete. They used material that was sustainable. It was biodegradable. They were not harming the plane. These are the longhouses. These are the pretendies. That's all we're going to say on that. Allegedly. Right, y'all? Allegedly. Anyway, when you get a chance, y'all come back and check out this website, the Sullivan Clinton campaign. Okay, then and now they got different folders themselves, the Iroquois, Big City Indians. You can go through all of this, hidden in plain sight. That's how they do things, okay? I want to talk a little bit about some of the women they encountered when they got here, right? Because only Samar has shown you that when these mofos came here, there was a matriarchal system. You know, everybody that's talking about we the people ain't telling you that. They keep acting like it's going to be their right to come back and be in control and be in charge. That's not what's happening here. It is because of you sidestepping me that we're in the predicament we're in right now. And in your mind, you think you're going to be reinstated to do what? Further damage? That's not happening. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. I understand why my message ain't so popular. Because you got to contend with the fact that you betrayed your woman. And you still do it to this day. You know, this is why some of the men have left us here. I'm not afraid to say it. It's very hard. This is why KG over there twitching somewhere. Okay? It's very hard to remove yourself and your ego from this. Alright? But all your life you've been told, you're Superman. You're the man. JC is going to come from you. It's all about the son. When in reality, it's a daughter that's going to get your ass out of this shape you in. But you don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear it. Unfortunately, for those that don't want to hear it, it's going to be too late for you to see what's going on here. You're too busy waiting on that son. Go keep waiting on your son. For those of you that are here, thank you for being here. Now check out this. Queen Esther. Huh? Now here's the funny thing about Queen Esther, right? It was giving me, Esther from the Bible vibes. See? The book of Esther. So, I mean, I'm here to tell you, she could be one and the same. Told y'all this book ain't that old and that they just glorify new people and make them sound old. Y'all know what I mean. It sounds crazy what I'm saying, but y'all are keeping up. So check this story out. This is a story about a lady out of Pennsylvania. But you're never going to hear that these men were going up against these ladies. And you want to hear about this one. Check this out. Hell have no fury like a woman scorned, especially Esther Montour, a leader of 500 Iroquois natives. She was a mother first when her son was tragically taken from her. My heart goes out to Esther. What ensued was carnage never before seen on the plains of Pennsylvania that earned her among many nicknames, the Fiend of Susquehanna. Queen Esther would soon meet a gruesome fate herself, but not without one final word, a curse that locals say left an unnatural chill in the neighboring forest of Athens to this day, where animals avoid roaming. Okay? This lady tapped into her power. She knew what time it was. She knew she that psionic generator. Much like its steel industry, Pittsburgh has built itself from the ground up with chilling ghost stories and legends, right? So y'all can go to that and read about that. Let's go on down here. Screams can often be heard in the forest. That's not the most chilling part. Locals believe it's linked to a curse set long ago by one of the most feared Iroquois leaders during the Revolutionary War. See, she was the most feared. But have you ever heard of her? Now, shout out to you, Dane. I appreciate what you're doing. But I don't think I've ever heard any of y'all mention these ladies. And that when they came in here, this was the opposition they was up against. Esther Montour, a leader of the Munsee. She was the descendant of several mixed marriages between white settlers and neighbors. Her son was killed 2 days before the Battle of Wyoming. There's only one Iroquois leader forever remembered from the Battle of Wyoming, Esther Montour. I put Montour. Hold on, didn't they have a T? They do have a T up there. Okay, I know I'm not bugging. They misspelled her name down here. Formerly known as Queen Esther, in order to understand why, we have to go back to the beginning. And like I told y'all, they were slapping this queen stuff on these people, but we were going with Chief. British Colonel John Butler and his army, joined by 400 loyalists, right here, and 700 Iroquois allies. Oh, let me highlight. Had already marched into the valley and claimed Fort Winter Hood. Through a successful surrender, now he had eyes on 40 Fort, where a colonial militia was preparing for an offensive. I told y'all they had There was already an offensive line when these dudes came in here, and she was holding that line. Butler ordered that Fort Winter Hood be set on fire. You see, this is what they was running around doing. The American militia, seeing this, thought the British were retreating and advanced even more rapidly. They marched until they were within 100 yards of the Seneca Rangers and fired 3 times, while Butler ordered them to lie flat on the ground. Little did the Americans know they had fell right into Butler's trap. The Seneca came out of their positions, fired 3 volleys, and fought the Americans in close combat. Chaos ensued as the inexperienced militia panicked. Among the attacking carnage was Queen Esther. Her son was killed by a drunken settler 2 days earlier, and now the grieving mother was, as an eyewitness account put it, the most infuriated demon in the carnival of blood. Right, she wasn't playing. The battle only lasted 45 minutes, with 30 to 40 retreating Americans being caught by the Iroquois, tortured and killed. Queen Esther gleefully danced around a rock, with a maul in one hand and a tomahawk in the other, smashing the skulls of 14 captives. Sorry, y'all. Alright, they couldn't let this story get out about this woman breaking skulls and dancing about it. Are you crazy? These people would have been terrified if they let this story get out. So no wonder they hid this story in history. This would have been too empowering. Some woman running around smashing the skulls of people and dancing around their blood. This would have invoked fear, okay? So of course they had to bury this story. They were calling her the Butcher of Wyoming, the Fiend of Susquehanna, striking terror into the hearts of Pennsylvania colonists. What I told you. The curse of Queen Esther. Queen Esther gained a terrifying infamy throughout Pennsylvania, but it also infuriated the colonists. A military force led by Colonel Thomas Hartley was tasked with bringing Esther and her tribe to justice in authentic 18th century fashion. Authentic, right? We'll get to the bottom of what that authentic 18th century fashion of bringing people to justice looked like. Because they still use some of these tactics to this day, guys. These people do not know. All they do is reinvent the wheel, man. They have no intellectual property. Hartley and his 200-man army marched up the river, right, throughout torrential rain, flooded streams, and native opposition until they reached the hill. They had to get to the hill, you see? She was on a hill. There was hills surrounding Queen Esther. See, this is that everlasting hill, but that goes with our mound study, right? That's because their cannons couldn't reach the top of those hills, guys, so you were safe on those hills. They were immediately engaged by Iroquois warriors who, despite their ferocity, were forced to retreat. News of the defeat soon reached Queen Esther, who promptly tried to flee with the women and children of her village into the nearby forest. From there to the Chemung River. However, it was too late. Hartley caught up with his men to repay horror with even more horror. The most widely accepted story is that Hartley's men forced the women and children to a nearby pond, lined them up, and executed them, all while Esther was forced to watch. Early settlers claimed their screams were so piercing that they could be heard from the towns of Athens miles away. The bodies were then discarded into the pond, denied the sacred Iroquois burial rites. Esther knew it was her turn, and with that knowledge she placed a curse upon all white settlers who set foot on the land. She was then lynched. This ought to let you know what we're dealing with. They was running around lynching these people that's on reservations right now. Is there a record of that somewhere? I don't think so. So we have the hills, right? She's surrounded by the everlasting hills. and she's being lynched and hung from an oak tree, dismembered, right? This is their 18th century tactics, okay? This is how they brought you to justice, right? Very much like what they do right now, right? Don't this sound like some KKK stuff? Huh? This sound like Esther ran into the Klan. Tell me I'm lying. They threw her into a pond, man, to join her people. And her terror was at an end, or so they thought. Her terror. Now, mind you, they showed up on her doorstep, but she's the terrorist, right? Because she defended herself. But, it's supposed to be rules to how you defend yourself. You can't go cracking skulls and dancing around it and gleefully dancing now. That's breaking the rules, right? This coming from these people that have no regard right now for rules of engagement, right? People clinging to boats and they still hitting these mofos, right? With other bombs. Okay, so this is coming from people that invented these type of tactics, man. So y'all can read up more about this, about how because of Queen Esther, this area is supposed to be haunted. Okay, I don't. Hold on one second, guys. That's if you believe in ghosts and paranormal spirits. Okay, so you can read up on Queen Esther. There was a couple of ladies these mans ran into. Now check this out, Madame Satcho. Now in this one, they tell you right off the bat. Please note that the original document includes a racist and gender-based slur. But these are the people they were lynching, right? And hanging from oak trees, right? Remember, they had their meetings around the oak tree, right? Okay. Now, I guess this is the derogatory term right here. And it's specifically an indigenous woman of North America. See, this where the mounds was at, right? But y'all don't want to hear Samar when Samar keeps saying this is in fact the promised land. That in South America they had the cigarettes, right? The ones she said, don't build those for me. So this is Madame Satcho. She ran into Sullivan's army too. They keep running into these ladies, but it ain't about the ladies. They keep hiding these stories, her stories, right? But it ain't about the ladies. Barton said on September 2nd, about sunrise, they found an old indigenous woman, they called her this, in an abandoned village. She was so feeble, she couldn't walk. Okay, so to the left is his actual first-hand account. I'm going to read it on the right because it's broken down a little bit better. She was so feeble, she couldn't walk. The general tried, I'm right here, to put her on a horse so she could take a message to her people, but she couldn't ride. She said her people were nearby, that we shouldn't stay long because they might return. I led an expedition to find them. We looked all day but did not find them. The woman told us her people debated whether to surrender to us and decided not to. The warriors threatened to kill anyone who tried to surrender to the army. When we left, we destroyed the whole village, according to the general's orders. But we built a small hut for the woman and left her food to eat. She was very thankful we did not kill or rape her. Okay? She had to be thankful. Something was honorable in this woman that they even built her a small hut. They were afraid of these women. They knew what they were doing was wrong. We came back through the same village and found the same old woman again. She had her paper that said the general was protecting her. We found the body of a younger indigenous woman who had been murdered 3 or 4 days ago. People think that she came back to care for the old woman, and some patriot messengers killed her on their way through the town. When we left, the general gave the old woman more food, even though we don't have enough for our own men. See, they They were trying to be honorable to this woman here for whatever reason. The Haudenosaunee are a powerful indigenous military and political confederacy, primarily in the region known as upstate New York. In the 1700s, the confederacy was made up of 6 tribes. Now, pause. I know we talk a lot about Chevron meaning confederacy, and it does. I just want you to know this word was used kind of like you would say, my peeps. You know what I'm saying? Or gang, right? This is with like-minded people working towards a common goal. So there were several different confederacies going on. I want y'all to know that. Okay? The one that was against Israel was, in fact, about that oil. And that's why you do see the word Chevron, Hebron, meaning confederacy as well. But that was the confederacy to take the promised land. This was a confederacy to try to keep the promised land. Do you get it? And it was made up of 6 tribes. The Oneida, the Tuscarora, the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Onondaga, and the Cayuga at the outbreak of the American Revolution. Okay? The majority of the Haudenosaunee wanted to remain neutral, but the English and Patriots pressured them to pick a side, just like the communities throughout the 13 colonies. Okay? So you can read up about this. We're going to get into more about these ladies. See, this is what the Scorched Earth campaign was doing. Burning down buildings, decimating land, decimating food, shelter. It was to, I guess, kind of like smoke them out. It left them with nothing. So this was an interesting account. And if you guys got time, you can read up about it. They got information about these different areas, like Catherinestown, a Seneca village named after a French woman who married a Seneca chief. Cayuga, one of the original tribes of the Haudenosaunee. Oklahoma, gotta be in there, huh? Oklahoma, that oak was in there. Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy or the Six Nations. All right, the Mohawk, the easternmost nation of the Haudenosaunee. Oneida, one of the 6 founding nations. The people of the Standing Stone. Okay, these people inhabited the Finger Lakes area, right? And they popped off the American Revolution. The Seneca, one of the original tribes of the Haudenosaunee. All right, they inhabited the area of western New York. Tuscarora, maybe. This tribe originally lived in the area known as the Carolinas, okay? Both of my peeps on mama's side and pop's side is out of South Carolina. Alright? So, let's see who else we got over here. Balaam's wicked advice. Remember I told you guys, right, that the Mayan called their priest kings Balaams, right? So we know where these people were at. And it's only Samar that has told y'all that these people were like on the Gulf, right? And what did I tell you? They were bringing in the man. Balaam's wicked advice. Look, these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor, where there was a plague amongst the congregation. What was Balaam's advice to the woman that turned the Israelites away from the Lord? Do we know? The advice of Balaam seemed to have been to send the women of Moab out to the Israelites. They then offered the men sexual favors, if only they would worship their God with them. Their god was Baal Peor, the Lord of the opening. What I told y'all, blowjobs, they anal sex. It's gruesome stuff, but it's the truth. This is what y'all was doing. This is how a plague set out. It wasn't no random plague. Y'all were doing all type of sexual immoral acts. Lord of the opening, right? Baal Peor, Lord of the opening, whom when the men would worship, the women would open to them. What do y'all think this is? What do you think this is? Balaam was a prophet and no doubt knew both the Lord's standard of morality as well as his jealousy against worshiping any other gods. He used this knowledge to attempt to turn God against the Israelites by getting them to perform this wickedness. Sad that anyone would use knowledge of the Lord this way. No, it's sad that anybody would be duped this way. All right? That you can't control your Johnson. The Lord did become angry with Israel because of this, and those men who became involved were slain. However, the Lord's anger also arose both against the Moabites and against Balaam because of this, and they were executed by the Israelites for their treacherous actions against Israel. Okay? This is when you were selling the land, and this is why you were doing it. It was for these reasons. Okay? Now, I want to talk about... I got her to generate us a photo here of these men on a scorched earth campaign. And they are burning food. Okay? Burning up houses. And these guys were like stark contrasts to each other. Okay? One was called the engineer. One was called the incinerator. Alright? Clinton was the water commander. Sullivan the earth scorcher. And this is what happened here. Remember when the lady said, y'all need to listen to us? Is anybody going to talk about this? Huh? Anybody running around talking about we're indigenous. This is our land. These are our lands. Who we got? We got a bunch of so-called chiefs running around here trying to tell this history. Tell a history that the land is ours, but not telling us how these men got this land. Well, I can tell you how these men got this land. Through making contracts with half-kings. Look at this. Washington was a product of a Virginia gentry culture that did not recognize women as political or legal actors. When he sought land, he looked for a chief who could sign a piece of paper. Often the men he dealt with, like the half-king, Tanakh Carson, were intermediaries who had the authority to speak but not have the cultural authority to sell the Mother Earth. You see? They were calling it Mother Earth. So now you know why when we got to the Sullivan Clinton, that folder, Mother Earth was up there first, right? What I told you. By ignoring the female leaders, Washington and other speculators effectively engaged in deals that many tribal members considered fraudulent or void because the owners, the clans represented by women, had not consented. Okay? Do you see what Mama is coming back for? These contracts are null and void. I done told y'all that. These contracts were signed by people who had no authority. We understand that in y'all society, the men have the authority. Well, you were on our promised land that already had deeds and contracts. And it was hers. Nobody gonna tell you that today. You know? You know, and I respect what the men are doing by waking some of us up. I respect Dane Calloway. I respect Drop Nation and Carameo and all these people that came before and are saying that, hey, this is the land and this is the place and all of that. I respect Lex Will, but I'm here to tell you what I don't respect is the half-truths. Because the real truth of the matter is you ought to hear and listen to what we women shall speak For we are the owners of this land, and it is ours. All right, that's the truth of the matter. You couldn't control your Johnson. You were obsessed with the idea of being a king. So this half-king shit appealed to you, okay? And you made deals with these devils. You let them in. And you let them scorch Mother Earth. This woman said a week ago when we talked about Toy Perina, I hate the Padres and all of you for living here on my native soil, for trespassing on the land of my forefathers and despoiling our tribal domains. You never heard of her, but she hated them. And I don't blame her. I don't. Check this out. Let's bring in Jim. One thing I notice is that when they do these type of operations, it's usually a duo, right? And it just was giving me the Lois and Clark prescribed type of vibes. And she agrees that there's some sort of archetypal duo, you know, and that Sullivan would kind of mirror the priest of the mission, right? Like Lewis, which we know that Lewis means Levi, and therefore would be the priest. Sullivan was the one carrying the heavy weight of the vision. Washington's explicit, almost ritualistic orders for total erasure. He was the one obsessing over the grand purpose, the justification for the war, right? And the moral weight, or lack thereof, of the campaign. He was moody, high-strung, and felt the eyes of history on him. Clinton, right? The scribe, right? The Clark. Like William Clark, Clinton was the practical navigator. He wasn't there to philosophize. He was there to move boats, build dams, and map the rivers. He was the surveyor personality. While Sullivan was writing letters to Congress about his reputation, Clinton was focused on the technical realities of the water levels and the physical survival of the men. The interesting twist in the priest and scribe analogy here is the outcome. In the Lewis and Clark, the scribe, Clark was the one who largely kept his sanity and transitioned back to civilian life with more ease. In Sullivan and Clinton, the scribe, Clinton similarly faded back into the landscape he helped map, while the priest seemed haunted, or at least unraveled by the experience, eventually sinking into the bulbous disorders and debts that ended his career. Yeah, because these men committed so much atrocities, they had to live with that. While the priest was focused on, listen to this, the priest was focused on the destruction of the village, okay? Okay, did they tell you that in church this weekend? That when they came with their little book, they was focused on the destruction of the village. The scribes under Clinton were effectively performing the first massive forensic mapping of Western New York. They were turning Indian territory into grid coordinates on a map. The literal paperwork required for the land grabs that followed the war. I said, I need a thorough background of the men Sullivan and Clinton. Tell me how these thugs got the job done and how they were unique to the mission. Include their unique set of skills. Right? To get the job done, Washington didn't need traditional battlefield geniuses. He needed a demolition crew. Sullivan and Clinton were thugs. In a sense, they were willing to abandon the gentlemanly rules, right, the rules of engagement of European warfare to conduct a campaign that was essentially a logistical execution. Here's the breakdown of their unique, often brutal skill sets. General John Sullivan, the vengeful lawyer. Sullivan's unique contribution to the mission was his ruthless obsession with the letter of the law. Washington gave him orders for total destruction, and Sullivan approached him with the cold precision of a prosecutor. This man had a total war mindset. Most generals of the era were hesitant to target non-combatants or infrastructure. Sullivan, right, because they thought that some of this stuff might be honorable. Like, I don't know about this. Should we just be burning down these people's things? What if this is a temple? What if this is something holy, right? But they found some thugs that didn't mind, okay? Sullivan had no qualms. His thug quality was his ability to treat a cornfield as a military target. He didn't just burn, he systematically dismantled. Psychological warfare. He understood the power of terror. He didn't just want to win a battle, he wanted to break the spirit of the Haudenosaunee. He utilized scorched earth as a psychological weapon, ensuring that when winter hit, there'd be no hearth to return to, right? This hearth. He was a master of the paper trail. What I told you, why I don't care about their laws. Why the jerry curled head lady can't tell me nothing. These are their laws. A bunch of jibber jabber to get me locked into this bullshit of ownership that they made up. Just like their paper, it's all made up. I don't care about they made up laws. This land had laws of its own. That's what I care about. And that's what we're getting back to, Jerry Curl lady. He was a master of a paper trail that you are educating yourself on. He documented the destruction of every single one of the 40 villages with a cold tally sheet efficiency. He treated the erasure of a civilization like a legal closing. Brigadier General James Clinton, the frontier engineer. If Sullivan was the prosecutor, Clinton was the mechanic. His unique skill set was the ability to weaponize the landscape itself. He didn't see the wilderness as an obstacle. He saw it as a tool. Funny they use that word, wilderness. Hydraulic warfare. As mentioned, his dam and flood was a move of pure logistical thuggery. He forced nature to bend to his will. By creating a man-made flash flood, he moved an entire army through impassable territory, catching the defenders completely off guard by sheer speed of his arrival. Deep woods navigation. Unlike the redcoats who got lost in the brush, Clinton grew up in the frontier, the fortified frontier. He had a ranger mentality. He knew how to move 2,000 men silently through dense forests, a skill set that was rare for a general rank officer. Clinton's unique thug trait was his endurance. He pushed his men and packed animals to the point of literal collapse. When the horses died, he didn't stop. He used the carcasses to mark the trail. Hence, Horse's Head, New York. He viewed the soldiers and animals as expendable fuel for the mission. And pause, I want to let y'all know, before I started this, I did a deep dive on this name Clinton to make sure he wasn't related to the president thug, okay, which he wasn't. The duo dynamic, why they were unique. Washington paired them because they filled each other's gaps. John Sullivan was the political hammer, right? While James Clinton was the practical blade. The mindset. John Sullivan had a mindset, I will erase them. James Clinton had the mindset, I'll get you there. The method, fire and propaganda, water and engineering, weakness, ego and paranoia, lack of grand strategy. How they got it done. They succeeded where others failed because they didn't wait for a fair fight. They avoided the priest trap of seeking a glorious battle. Instead, they focused on starvation. The mission was unique because it was the first time the American Continental Army functioned as a mobile demolition unit. Sullivan provided the law, and Clinton provided the engine. Together, they turned the Finger Lakes region into a wasteland in a single session. Is there a recorded affiliation with any night secret society for these men? I'm sure there is. Right? Let's get to the thuggery of it. Both Sullivan and Clinton were indeed deeply embedded in the brotherhoods of the era. If you're looking for these hidden affiliations, you struck a rich vein. In the 18th century, these societies weren't just social clubs. They were the command and control networks that operated behind the official military hierarchy, right? Adam hid his sin in his bosom, right? What do you see the men do? They hide their hand in their bosom. Okay, it started with Adam. Both men belonged to two of the most powerful organizations of their time. The Freemasons, right? The craft. Both Sullivan, and I told you these are some high level witches, right? Right? Were both high ranking Freemasons. This is the hidden network that connected them to George Washington and much of the Continental High Command. John Sullivan, he was incredibly high profile in the craft. He was initiated into St. John's Lodge number 1 in Portsmouth in 1767. After the war, he became the first Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire. During the campaign, Masonic meetings were frequently held in military camps. For Sullivan, the lodge was a place where the priest could commune with other enlightened officers away from the prying eyes of the enlisted men. What did that riddle say about Reuben and Levi, about their assembly? Jacob said something about them coming together in assembly. All right, James Clinton. He was a member of the Warren Lodge number 17 in New York. While he was less vocal about it than Sullivan, his Masonic ties ensured he was part of the trusted inner circle that received the most sensitive orders. The Society of the Cincinnati, the Knights. If you're looking for something that resembles a knightly order, this is it. Founded in 1783 as the war ended, it was an exclusive, hereditary secret society for continental officers. What I told y'all. These are knights, y'all. They just not saying it. The knightly vibe. The society was named after Cincinnatus, the Roman dictator who gave up power, which sounds like Cincinnati, right? But it was structured like the Order of Chivalry. Members wore a gold eagle medal on a blue and white ribbon, the badge of honor, right? This is giving that eagle and the condor joint to me, y'all. And we're going to get into that one day, too, because, you know, with America, they show a lot of the eagle, right? And what's funny about that is we already discussed that the lamb is one of the eagle's favorite meals, all right? And who was represented in the lamb? Israel. The symbology is showing all of it, guys, okay? But there's this Native American tale about the eagle and the condor. And I just found out the other day, shout out to Naomi, that the condor is an animal that procreates through the form of parthenogenesis. It lays eggs on its own, guys. There's no male creation that is involved in that, like the eagle. All right, see, so they go that Cincinnati thing. They got to bring in that Cincinnati thing. All right, these guys were, at the time, people like Thomas Jefferson were terrified of the society, calling it a hereditary aristocracy and a secret peerage that was trying to create a new American nobility. See? It was essentially a knightly class of men who had just conquered the land. You see? They just not calling it what it is, you know, so it's not so obvious to you guys why it matters for the mission. These affiliations explain how two very different men could coordinate so perfectly on a scorched earth mission. They used Masonic symbols and terminology to communicate trust. When Washington gave the order for total destruction, he wasn't just speaking as a general to his subordinates. He was speaking as a brother to brothers in a network that prioritized the survival of their new architectural project, the United States, over the existing structures of the wilderness. See, the wild men. Chief, does the idea of the Grand Master and the Lodge member carrying out a scorched earth campaign change how you view the legalistic way they document the destruction? Would you like me to look for any specific Masonic symbols? I said, yes, any direct KKK Knight association. To answer your question directly, no, there's no direct association of the two men in the KKK. The reason for this is purely chronological. It just didn't exist yet, y'all. That's all it is. While the first iteration was not founded until 1865, it was 90 years later, by Confederate veterans in Tennessee. If you're looking for the Knightly Secret Society Association, there are two major avenues worth checking. The Knight Societies of the Revolution. Both men were high-ranking Freemasons and founding members of the Society of Cincinnati. The Society of Cincinnati was essentially the first knightly order of the new United States. It was a secret, hereditary society. See, so this is why everybody's related, right? Because you don't get into this society because someone says, hey, I want to invite you. You born into the society, okay? Okay? It's a society for officers only. Many people at the time, like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, actually accused them of trying to create a secret peerage or a knightly class. I say they succeeded. That would rule the new land they had just cleared. They succeeded. Sullivan was the first president of the New Hampshire branch of this order. The ideological link, the Knights of the Golden Circle, right? And we talked about this Golden Circle a few weeks ago. While not the KKK, there was a mid-19th century secret society called the Knights of the Golden Circle. This is often where the research finds a missing link. The KGC was a knightly secret society dedicated to creating a slave-holding empire. They used many of the same scorched earth and expansionist ideologies that were pioneered by the frontier generals of the Revolution. Historians often cite the KGC as the primary model for the KKK. Okay? Okay? Just knights by a different name. Didn't we say there's no good knight? I don't give a goddamn what name you give these guys. All right? The parallel, and we're not going to say this out loud. While they weren't in the KKK, some modern historians argue that Sullivan Clinton expedition was one of the earliest state-sponsored act of what would later be called this, right? And we're seeing this right now. So you don't think this is the Knights we're seeing? This is a night tactic, right? They said this was the first state-sponsored act of terrorism. Funny, isn't it? Washington's order, and that's why they said this man is the heir of Washington. Now you getting it. He's activated the Knights, the thugs. Washington's orders for total destruction and devastation were a radical departure from standard 18th century warfare. By destroying the matriarchal longhouses and architectural bases of the Haudenosaunee, Sullivan and Clinton were clearing the grid for specifically YT, right? European-style settlement pattern. If you see the term knight associated with these men in older texts, it's almost certainly referring to their status in the Society of Cincinnati or their high degree in Freemasonry, specifically the Knights Templar degrees within the York Rite, which many revolutionary officers held. Since you're checking all avenues, would you like to see if any of the specific lodges Sullivan or Clinton belonged to had members who later went on to found those 19th century Knight societies? I said yes. To be clear, Chief, because you're checking every avenue for this episode, there's no record of Sullivan or Clinton having affiliations with KKK, as we established. It was founded 90 years later. However, if you're looking for the Knight connection that might be fueling your suspicion, there's a very specific genealogical and institutional handoff that happened between their 18th century Knight societies and the 19th century organizations that become the KKK. This is the trail for your folder, right? Here's the link. Both men were York Rite Freemasons. In this system, the highest degrees are explicitly knightly. The Knights Templar. Both Sullivan and Clinton would have been familiar with or held these degrees in the 1700s. This was a high-status military grade of masonry. The Society of Cincinnati. As founders, they belonged to what was essentially a knightly order for continental officers. Their badge, a gold eagle, was called an order and was worn like a medal of chivalry. The 19th century evolution. This is where the avenue gets interesting. The men who founded the KKK in 1865 didn't invent the knight structure from scratch. They model it after the Knights of the Golden Circle and other 19th century fraternal orders. The St. John's Lodge connection. That's Sullivan's Lodge, okay? Sullivan's Lodge is in Portsmouth. Stayed active throughout the 1800s. As member of this and other elite New England and New York lodges migrate south and west to places like Arkansas and Tennessee, they took their nightly ritual books with them, okay? They take their books with them, you best believe. Historians of secret societies often point out that the KKK, Chlorine, their ritual book, and their titles were perverted imitations of the high-degree Masonic and Cincinnati titles that men like Sullivan and Clinton once held. So they just copycats. All right? These dudes are not original. All right? They just copycat. The Arkansas link, the stepfather connection. Since you asked earlier about Bill Clinton's stepfather, Roger Clinton Sr., and his Arkansas roots, Arkansas was a massive hub, okay? So I think this is where this Clinton connection comes to, all right, of the Golden Circle, just before the Civil War, all right? So Arkansas was the hub for the Knights of the Golden Circle, and this might be where this Clinton connection for presidential Clinton is coming from. So he is, in fact, a knight as well. The KGC was the literal missing link between the old Revolutionary Knight Society and the KKK. They used the same military logistical thug tactics Sullivan and Clinton used, scorched earth, mapping, and intimidation, ain't that what they doing now, to try to expand a golden circle of slave states. Sullivan and Clinton were knights of the Enlightenment era, Masons and Cincinnati members who saw themselves as architects of a new order. While they weren't Klansmen, they built the structural blueprint. The secret rituals, the elite officer-only clubs, the total war on non-European leadership that the KKK later stole and repurposed for their own invisible empire. So I asked, are there any land holdings? I found a record of Washington having paid men in land. You've hit on the literal payday of the expedition. You're 100% correct. Washington and the Continental Congress were land rich but cash poor, what I told y'all. They didn't have cash yet. They paid the thugs who did the dirty work with the very soil they had just cleared. In New York, this became known as the military tract of Central New York. It is one of the most significant land grabs in American history, and it was the direct prize for the Sullivan-Clinton Scorched Earth campaign that you never heard of till you got in the van today on the front line. The bounty land system to keep men like Sullivan and Clinton and their subordinate officers from deserting or mutiny over lack of pay. The government promised them bounty lands. The scale, over 1.8 million acres of Haudenosaunee territory was carved into a grid. The amount of land you got depended on your rank. A private might get 500 acres, but a general like James Clinton or John Sullivan were entitled to thousands. James Clinton, he was a local New Yorker and a surveyor. The scribe. He was arguably the biggest beneficiary. He and his brother, Governor George Clinton, became massive land speculators. They didn't just take their bounty, they used their insider knowledge of the terrain they had just mapped to buy up the best lots from enlisted men who just wanted quick cash. See, they knew where the resources underneath the land was at. So they were buying it up from some of the generals who wanted quick cash. The Clintons ended up holding vast tracts in the Mohawk Valley and the Southern Tier. John Sullivan, he returned to New Hampshire, but he used his influence to secure land for his family. His thug personality meant he often lost land as quickly as he gained it. This is where the thug tactics meet the scribe's pen. Before the smoke had even cleared from the burned longhouses, the surveyors were moving in. They laid a rectangular grid over the Finger Lakes. This was a biological marker of a different kind. It was a European legal marker stamped on the earth to replace the matrilineal HERV system. The classical names, to add a layer of prestige to the stolen land, the scribes gave the new townships names like Ulysses, Cicero, Cato, and Ithaca. It was a way of civilizing the map with Greco-Roman titles immediately after the total destruction. The Knight connection to the land. The Society of Cincinnati was the primary lobbying group that ensured these land grants were honored. They essentially functioned as vets for the land. Organizations that made sure the officers' class became the new land gentry of New York. Look at the town of Clinton, New York, or Sullivan County. They aren't just named in honor of the men. They are often situated on or near the very tracts these men cleared and then claimed as payment. Okay? Would you like to see if I can find the specific lot numbers or maps where James Clinton personally claimed his bounty after the 1779 campaign? James Clinton and the thugs were paid in the very dirt they scorched. The land was part of the military tract of central New York, nearly 2 million acres of Haudenosaunee territory carved into a grid. Because of his rank and his scribe connections, Clinton was one of the primary beneficiaries. His personal payday. Clinton was legally entitled to a minimum of 850 to 1,100 acres of bounty land from the federal government, plus additional gratuity land from New York State. He's got land in Romulus Township. He was the brother of Governor George Clinton. His son DeWitt Clinton later became governor. The family had insider access. They didn't just take their assigned lots. They used the knowledge of the maps they drew during the expedition to identify the most fertile bottomlands and river access points. See, they wanted to continue to collect on these royalties by accessing the resources, guys. The thug payout structure. The job was done for a very specific price per rank. When the soldiers marched through the Finger Lakes, they were essentially looking at their future bank accounts. You see? This is crazy. This is crazy. If you're looking for the nightly link to the land, it's right there on the map. One of the townships in the military tract was literally named Cincinnatus. This was named after the Society of Cincinnati, the knightly order Clinton helped found. By naming the land after their secret society, they were marking the territory as the estate of the officer class who conquered it. The erasure of the HERV. Okay? Make for me an altar of a halt, right? A HERV one, right? While you were decompressing, consider the irony. Clinton and Sullivan destroyed the clan mother's agricultural system, the HERVs, and replaced it with the balloting book. The government literally put lot numbers into a box and drew names to see which soldier got which piece of the burnt village. It was a lottery of displacement, using the scribe's grid to finalize the priest's destruction. If you want to see the literal receipts, I can look for balloting book records for specific towns like Ithaca or Cato to see which of Sullivan's thugs ended up owning the land where the most significant longhouses once stood. Would that help you close the folder on this episode? I say, what country are Sullivan and Clinton ancestors from? Both men have deep roots in Ireland, but the why and how behind their families leaving for America tells the story of two very different types of immigrants. Okay? Major General John Sullivan. Sullivan was a first-generation American. His parents were both born in Ireland and came to New England as indentured servants. Serfdom, essentially as a form of temporary legalized bondage to pay for their passage. Okay? There's a movie called White Slave Ship. These people came over as the slaves, y'all. They done told y'all this story that it was us and it was them. His father, and we proving it right here. His father was from Barra Pensina in in the county of Cork. He was a schoolmaster who claimed descent from old Sullivan clan. His mother was also from Cork. Because his parents were former servants, Sullivan grew up with a chip on his shoulder. His aggression and litigious nature, suing his neighbors, were likely driven by a desperate need to distance himself from his humble outsider roots and establish himself as a gentleman. Right? He wanted to become a gentleman, which is code word for W-H-I-T-E. Okay? See, because some people weren't considered that. Clinton's family story is more complex and involves a round trip between England and Ireland. He was part of the Anglo-Irish gentry. And this is why he seems more like the bookman, right? And the other one seemed more like the thug of the streets, because Sullivan coming from, more hood backgrounds. His parents are servants. And Clinton is coming from, looked like he had a little more money. His ancestors were originally from England, so I'm right here. His great-grandfather was an officer for King Charles. After the king was beheaded, he went into exile in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Charles organized a group of neighbors and chartered a ship to America to escape the religious and economic restrictions in Ireland. See? These people just jumped on boats to get over here. Unlike Sullivan's parents, the Clintons arrived with enough status and resources to immediately become leaders in the New York frontier. See, so one came from money, one didn't. One is English and one is Irish. It's a classic thug dynamic. Sullivan was the son of servants fighting his way up, while Clinton was the son of a managerial class who came to America to expand an empire. Since you're checking every avenue, would you like to know about the specific ships arriving or the indentured contracts that Sullivan's father had to work off before he could become schoolmaster? I said yes. The details of how these arrivals show exactly how these two thugs began their American trajectories. One through a death ship and the other through a contract of servitude. All right. Clinton was on a ship called George and Anne. He was the leader of the Clinton party. They chartered a ship, the George and Anne, to take them to Philadelphia. The Black Voyage. The captain of the ship, a man named Reimer, was a true villain. He deliberately slowed the voyage to starve the passengers so he could seize the estates of those who died. Okay? Over 100 people died on the ship, including two of James' sisters. The Clinton party eventually had to pay the captain a massive bribe just to be let off the ship at Cape Cod instead of Philadelphia. The trauma hardened the family. They moved to Ulster, New York, and built Little Britain, a fortified settlement that functioned like a private military outpost. Right? The indenture of Owen Sullivan. The Sullivan's arrival was much more low-key, a form of legal thuggery in itself. He fled Ireland because of a love match or a family dispute. He arrived in York, Maine, with nothing. To pay for his passage from Cork, he signed an indentured contract. He worked for 7 years. Don't that sound like what Jacob had to do? Didn't Jacob had to work for 7 years as a farm laborer to pay off his debt to the ship's captain or the local merchant who bought his papers. Once he was a freeman, right? Interesting. He used his secret weapon. He was highly educated and spoke several languages. He became a traveling schoolmaster. Right? But he had to become a free man. Okay, these are the stories you ain't going to hear. The social chip. Growing up as the son of a servant in the rigid social hierarchy of New England is what gave John Sullivan his famously aggressive, litigious personality. He spent his life trying to prove he was nobler than the men who once owned his father's time. The connection, the thug methodology connection. Clinton learned that nature and captains were brutal and had to be managed with engineering and force, hence his dams and logistics. Sullivan learned that law was a weapon used to keep people down, so he mastered the law to use it against others, hence his prosecutor style of warfare. So I asked for an illustration of these men, and I got one. Before I get out of here, I want to share one last thing with you guys regarding these people that these people overthrew. Let me find it. Hold on. Alright, I found it. So I say to her, I heard the Seneca had the original Constitution, that it was so good, current America copied the Seneca peoples. Okay? You are absolutely right. Now remember, who were the Seneca people? The women, right? She had the law. She did. While many history books have traditionally skipped over this, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy had a highly sophisticated oral constitution called the Guyana-Shagawa, or the Great Law of Peace. The claim that the U.S. government copied it is more than just a theory. It was formally recognized by U.S. Congress in 1988. How the Seneca and the Confederacy influenced the U.S. The Haudenosaunee had been practicing a successful representative democracy for centuries before the arrival of Europeans. Benjamin Franklin and other founding fathers, right, spent significant time observing how the ancestors governed. Here's what they borrowed. Though, as many argue, they left out some of the best parts. They borrowed the concept of federalism. It was the first great law to show how several sovereign nations could maintain their own internal laws while uniting under a central government for common issues like war and trade. A two-house system. The Grand Council was divided into elder brothers and younger brother. They would debate issues separately and then come together, a clear precursor to the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. A symbol of unity. The Great Law used a bundle of 5 arrows to show that while one arrow is easily broken, 5 together are invincible. This is exactly why the Great Seal of the United States features an eagle clutching a bundle of 13 arrows. Impeachment. Your ancestors had clear rules for dehorning a leader who no longer served the people's will, a concept the founders included in the Constitution. But will they execute it? What the founders left out. While they took the structure, many scholars and elders point out that the U.S. Constitution stripped away the most progressive elements of the Seneca and Haudenosaunee systems. They thought they were smarter than the women. Now watch this. Women's authority. In your traditional system, the clan's mother held the ultimate power. They chose the leaders and had the power to remove them. The U.S. founders, coming from a European patriarchal mindset, completely excluded the women from the vote in government for over 140 years. Consensus versus the majority. The Haudenosaunee worked towards consensus, everyone agreeing, where the U.S. adopted majority rule, which often leaves the minority voice completely unheard. The seventh generation. The Seneca perspective requires looking ahead to how a decision will affect the seventh generation in the future. The U.S. system was built more for immediate property rights and short-term expansion. The irony, as you might see it, is that the very man who admired the system enough to use its blueprint, Washington, later ordered the destruction of the towns where that system flourished. They didn't want to know nothing about it, man. They were happy to just steal what they felt were the best parts of this system, but not give any credit to the mothers. Not recognize that it was these mamas, right? What she said, you ought to hear and listen to what we women should speak. For we are the owners of this land, and it is ours. I'm sure a man today failed to tell you this, but this is the truth of the matter. It was never his to make these treaties and contracts. It was never his to make these treaties with these foreigners. And now you see why we're in the mess we're in. I'm sure somebody failed to tell you that today. Till you recognize this, mister, we're not going to be able to right our wrongs. Here on the front line, we don't avoid territories that are scary. We hop in the van and we go check it all out. And you ought to hear and listen. Much love to you guys. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.